I think one of the most interesting things to have happened over the last 18 months is the proliferation of affordable mechanical GMT movements. Seiko launched their NH34 and then Miyota with their 9075. And I've had the opportunity to review 2 watches so far this year that had the 9075 movement in them. Well, today we are looking at another watch that also uses that movement, and this is a new brand to the channel, so a big thanks to them for sending me this in for review. And this is the Nezumi Aviera GMT automatic watch. There's a lot to like about this watch, but one thing that you know that I'll definitely have to make a comment on when we talk about the dial. But let's dive into the watch itself. So this has that familiar explorer type vibe to it, but it also has a few elements of other watches in there as well that they have homaged. And I would say this is an actual homage. I think homage is really used incorrectly in the watch collecting world, but this is what I would say is a true homage. It's taking inspiration from other watches, well the case is, and then it's adding their own flair to it, adding their twist to it, and then creating a whole new design out of that. So let's talk about a few of those elements. So first of all, we have a 39.8mm case across the bezel, 47.1 from lug to lug, 11.6mm thickness, and a 20mm lug width. Here you can see it on my 7.2-inch wrist. This watch wears really nicely, but it does have some weight to it. I weighed it in at 146 grams. So as soon as you take it out of the box, you definitely feel that luxury weight to it, I would say. Even though the bracelet does have a little bit of jangle to it, the overall feel in the hand is of a watch a lot more expensive than this would be, and we'll get to the pricing towards the end. Before we dive into more aesthetics about the watch itself, I've got to give a huge shout out for the box that it comes in. It comes in this very retro, looks perhaps like an old engine part would come in this box, but you can clearly see that Nezumi, who is a Swedish company, the watches are assembled in Germany. You can clearly see that the watch designer, this particular watch designer, David, and the whole team over there are clearly obsessed with graphic design, because everything about the design of this box and the fonts that are used on the box and that are used on the watch itself, a lot of thought has been put into it. And this box, I think, is just absolutely fantastic. I think it would look great on a shelf. It's quite low profile. This outer is an outer to also an internal box, which has a leather feel to it. Again, more of a slender style box with a nice velvety interior to keep the watch in. 10 out of 10 for the box. Looking at the watch now itself, we have that familiar Explorer 2 type bezel. The fonts are slightly different, but it does have that radial sunburst. And this is something that they've also spent a lot of time designing, because if you move it to the side, it has a UFO style to it. There is a transition between the main case and then this bezel. This is a fixed bezel. It can't be moved. And in fact, even though this is a GMT watch, you can only really track 2 time zones. So your main time zone, 3 hands, and then the GMT hand, which we'll talk about slightly later. And the GMT hand is pointing to the 24-hour dial on the bezel here that is fixed. Talked about the Explorer 2 inspiration, but if we move down to those really nice twisted lugs, very reminiscent of the Omega Seamaster and also the Omega Speedmaster as well. So they've taken a little bit of inspiration, I think, from those 2 watches as well. You do get different options with this watch. The Jubilee bracelet, I think you should definitely go for. It's decent enough quality, has a pin adjustment system, but the pins were surprisingly high quality when I got them out. Sometimes when you get a watch pin out, you can rub it in between your fingers and it will just disintegrate, whereas these feel very high quality. Quick release for the bracelet. The clasp is short but nice. It has 4 positions of micro adjustment, has that security fold over, and then the mechanism itself is nicely machined. There's no additional branding except on the security fold over, so it's a fairly off the shelf outer clasp, and there's no micro adjust or on the fly adjust, I should say. You can't ratchet it out a position or 2 if your wrist swells in the heat like mine does. But overall, it has a decent feel to it. It's completely brushed to match the almost completely brushed stylings of the case. We do have some polished elements. There's a small chamfer down the side of the lugs, and then the side of the bezel as well appears to have a little bit of polish to it as well. But overall, brushed case, so it does have a very tool watch feel to it. Nezumi were kind enough to send me 2 other strap options as well. FKM, fairly standard rubber strap, but also a very high quality brown leather strap. This surprised me at how how nice this feels. Supple, again, quick adjust so you can quickly swap it out. And I think the brown plays very nicely with the blue of the dial itself. I'd say my least favorite is this FKM rubber strap. Because the head of the watch is a little heavy, as we've discussed before, it caused the watch to slump down a little bit on my wrist. And because the back of the case has a very deep engraving, that engraving is also isn't the smoothest. So because the FKM strap was slumping towards my wrist, I did find the back of that case with a few of the sharp edges on there rubbing against the bone of my wrist, and it wasn't the most pleasant sensation, should we say. So I then reverted back to having this on the bracelet, because the bracelet just straightens the whole watch up on the wrist and makes it balance a lot better, for me anyway. There are two different versions of the Aviera GMT, a black dial version and a blue dial version. I've gone with the blue dial, and it's a metallic blue. It's a flat, there's no sunburst, slightly satin finish, but really plays with the light when you're outside. That nicely contrasts with the, I wouldn't say fauxtina, it's more like a cream coloured lume, and this is matched with the cream cover of the hands as well. The lume is a little bit of a mixed bag, I'll say. There is definitely a healthy application on the hands and on the second hand. The dial itself also has an application of lume, but it's not as thick as on the hands. And there is one bit disappointing with the lume, but we'll go into that as we talk through the hands. The hands have that aviation feel to them, floating hands, where the center of the hands, or the hands towards the main pin, are colored to match the dial, so they do slightly disappear as if they're floating on there, which gives a nice look. There is no applied indices on here, it's all printed lume on the dial. The watch has a 200-meter water resistance, which is printed on the dial. Now, the GMT hand is the main focus of the hands, and that's because it is oversized GMT hand for what we're used to seeing on other watches. This is a skeletonized hand, but it has a really nice look, a subdued orange color scheme, so really separates it from the other hands. The only slightly disappointing thing with the GMT hand, although I'm a huge fan of the size of this GMT hand, this really is unapologetic that it's a GMT watch. The only disappointing thing with this hand is it does have lume. It's only on the very tip and not very liberally applied, so the GMT hand does fade slightly more than the others. Perhaps it's not as important to see in the dark, the GMT hand, but even so. Now to the point that, you know, if you've watched the channel, I'm gonna have to make comment to, and it's the fact that it doesn't have the date on it. You know, I'm a huge fan of the date on all watches, but I do think it's particularly important on a GMT watch, especially if you're using it for travel, because you might be traveling across the international date line and need to see the date. It is a shame that they haven't included it on here. I did specifically ask them about this, and this was a purposeful design choice by David, who designed this watch. He is not a fan of the date complication, but the date is a controversial subject, so let me know in the comment section down below what you think, whether this watch needs a date or not. The 9075 movement, so you don't feel that there is a ghost date position, because this movement is what's called a traveler's GMT. Now what that means is you pull the crown out all the way, and then you set the GMT hand and the main minute hand and the second hacks at that position. So you set that minute hand and the GMT hand to the second time zone that you want to monitor. This GMT hand is pointing at the 24 positions on the bezel. You set that, and the first position is where you quick adjust the hour hand to the time zone that you are currently in. What this means is that when you are traveling, why it's called a traveler's GMT, so you can pull the position out and then move your main hand back and forward a couple of hours. So if, like me, if I live in Florida, if I was going back to California, I could just quickly pull it out to the first position and then set the hour hand back 3 positions. I'm not disrupting the second hand, and I'm not disrupting the GMT hand either. Now, the reason that you're not feeling a ghost position on the crown is because how this particular movement works is to set the date. You do have to cycle all the way through the month using the hour hand, going past the 12 position twice to get to the next date. It is a bit cumbersome to set the date on this movement, but obviously that's not a problem because this doesn't feature on this watch, so you won't feel that ghost position on the crown. Let's talk about the price now, so you can make a decision how this watch fits in with the other watches in this category. This watch is coming in at $651 on this brushed bracelet. On the rubber strap, it's coming in at $541, and then on the brown leather, it's coming in at $574. As I mentioned before, I would opt to go with it on the bracelet. I think it completes the look, and then you can easily add in what I would recommend, the leather strap they've done a quite good job of this leather strap as an aftermarket. So that basically fits in between the other two GMTs that we've seen using this movement. The Zelos is still coming in at around the $560 mark, and then that Jack Mason Strato timer was around the $1,000 mark. So this fits in between the two of those. This one is assembled in Germany, designed in Sweden, but obviously using parts from around the world because we do have that Japanese movement in here as well. I'm very interested to know what you think in the comment section down below. Is this a watch that you'd look at? Have you had Nezumi watches before? Should I review more watches from Nezumi? Let me know in the comment section down below, and I'll see you next time on Casual Watch Reviews.